Welcome to this episode of a content series brought to you by ITAP Academy Connect, a content initiative that's developed in conjunction with Industrial Transformation Asia Pacific, our region's equivalent of the Hanover Messe trade event, focusing on Industry 4.0. My name is Jane, and I'm glad to be your host here today. So by now, pretty much everybody has heard about how businesses and entire industries have faced and are continuing to face supply chain disruptions due to the pandemic. But what this means for different industry sectors will differ, depending on the characteristics of each sector and how they operate. And this is where ITAP Academy Connect comes in, as we bring you insights from discussions with speakers, not only from the supply chain and logistics sectors, but also leaders and practitioners in various industry sectors to tell us what these disruptions really mean. Okay, so to support the needs and learning interests of industry partners and you, our audiences, we have lined up for you with ITAP Academy Connect, a whole series of webinar-like interactions, speeches, and talks from speakers in the coming weeks and months. The purpose of this is to create the basis for you to come together and share insights, experiences, and lessons learned during and beyond this pandemic on what it takes, well, what it means to survive these challenging times. For today's session, we are delighted to collaborate with the Singapore Logistics Association for today's two-part webinar. In part one, we will have a panel discussion with key players in the supply chain and logistics sector, followed by two live breakout sessions focusing on the semiconductor and the FMCG sectors, where you are welcome to interact and ask the speakers questions directly. After the breakout sessions, please also join us at our community platform called The Interchange, where we can continue the discussions and tackle questions that we may not have time to cover today. So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our speakers in the first part of our webinar. In no particular order, I'm pleased to introduce Mr. Eugene Heng, Managing Director and Founder of Masindo Logistics. Eugene has come a long way, from starting the company with just one 24-foot truck where he was also the driver. He expanded Masindo vertically to encompass container trucking and gradually embrace innovation and digitalization over the years, such that Masindo today has a fleet of 70-plus vehicles, moving significant volumes of tonnage with its own 50,000 square foot logistics hub. The next speaker is Mr. Ko Sanju, who is the founder and managing director of iHub Solutions, which he established to transform the logistics landscape and be a global digital leader in complex supply chain logistics. iHub has become a regional presence today, and Sanju has led it to win separate recognition from Enterprise Singapore and also Supply Chain Asia that affirms its digital transformation and innovative capabilities. Also joining us is Mr. Ken Ngan, a 30-year veteran in the logistics industry who has led CK Shipping successfully into becoming a diversified and fully integrated logistics company with 15 offices across Asia Pacific and divisions also in sea freight, exhibition logistics, relocation, cotton logistics, warehouse supply chain, and capabilities dedicated to the aerospace and aviation industry. Our moderator in this segment is Jerry Tan, Managing Director and co-founder of Griffin Kinetic, a multimodal logistics service provider dedicated to time-critical and temperature-sensitive supply chain challenges faced in the maritime and healthcare services industries. He's also Honorary Secretary and Co-Chair of the Multimodal Transport Committee of Singapore Logistics Association, and he strongly supports professional development in the industry through his work with the Institute of Technical Education, Business and Services Academic Advisory Committee, where he also represents the logistics sector as a member of the National Productivity and Continuing Education Council. So with that, I'm very happy to hand things over to Jerry to take us through the discussion with our speakers on our main topic today, which is supply chain resilience in the face of a pandemic. Over to you, Jerry.
Thank you, Jane. Good afternoon, everyone. Wow, that was fantastic, Jane. Quite a mouthful, actually. But you made my job very much easier because this three gentlemen that we have actually on the panel have really have a very distinguished and very illustrated career. But you have done most part of it already for me, so thank you very much. Before I begin, I was just wondering whether we could have a glimpse of the poll. Were there some questions that we did prior to the session, Jay?
Okay, can we pull up the poll results that we had earlier?
I suppose this was mainly just to have a...
There we go.
Oh, okay. So earlier on, we were talking about the two Lees. So the augmented reality inspections was the second one that came, right? So this gives us a good understanding of the profile of the audience today, and their understanding also and how they perceive innovations in technology and how they play in transforming our supply chain. Thank you very much for the poll results. Hi everyone, my name is Jerry, and I'll be your moderator this afternoon. Now back in 2015, our then Prime Minister Tharman, by way of an interview at St. Gallen Symposium, made a reference to our nation's fortitude, to that of a trampoline. Now you see, a trampoline not only catches you when you fall, but then it bounces you back every time. Now, ladies and gentlemen, fellow colleagues, that is resilience. Today, we have with us a distinguished panel to help us understand how they break the fall, but also how they were able to bounce back from this pandemic. So I'll begin now with a question to the three panelists. We have been hearing the term supply chain disruption for a while now. So how is this shaping out regionally and in Singapore now that we are already into several months into this pandemic? And are there any still ongoing issues and challenges that's been encountered? Perhaps Eugene, you would like to take this off first?
Thanks, Gary. Okay. The current pandemic has impacted everyone, including logistics and supply chain. I believe this is important now for us come together as an industry to share ideas and to help each of other industry to moving in the future. And we know that this pandemic will not stop here. It will be continuous, like what our government said. You see, for the past 3 months, I believe our government have helped us in industry, even to our people in Singapore. But unfortunately, these 3 months still have some industry and some company still closed down, still not able to survive. Moving forward, at this pandemic, we can see in our industry, we need to change the whole idea of business to survive. One of them, I think that moving forward, digital technologies is one what our government encourage, and I think that's what we're supposed to do moving forward. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Eugene. Perhaps next we will hear from Ken, what your thoughts are with regards to this supply chain disruption.
Thanks, Gary. Hi, Jane. Thanks for the introduction, opening up this webinar. I guess we have actually experienced in this circuit breaker time. I guess myself, we are actually more of a logistics service providers. I guess with our this circuit breaker time, we actually have disruption to our services, which I see there is actually immediate short-term issues, or in the longer run, it is actually also to rethink our business model and especially our operational efficiencies. I think the short-term issues is like we have actually essential staff that are still allowed to perform their job, but these are actually the more of the ground staff like warehousemen, drivers, laborers. These are the people that are allowed to actually work. But actually, we also have quite a big handful of operations staff which is sitting in office. This group of staff are the one that are only allowed skeleton staff to perform the duties in the office to continue. Whereas all the other staff actually have to work from home. I guess a lot of companies, SMEs companies, faces this sudden changes. Immediately, it's like laptop, they couldn't operate without a laptop because I guess a lot of companies is using things like desktop, that was the basis. And I guess a lot of logistic players also uses operational system that is hardware server, where this actually is impossible to operate from home, which is things like solutions like crowdsourcing, sitting on the cloud. I guess also there is also a lot of logistics service provider like ourselves. Today, a lot of business actually is not just local business that is done locally. A lot of the business is now done regionally, meaning to say that there are actually cross-strait shipments, we call it. So there are countries that, unlike Singapore, that they do not have this circuit breaker or locking down, and business still goes on. So when the players like us that we deal with countries, whether is it from the original port or from the destination, when they do not have such lockdown situations, it is difficult to actually tell the customers that, oh, sorry, we are disrupted because we are closed. I guess this is another big effect. Not having this kind of data sharing or moving forward to have at least the communication platform, which I believe, becomes a kind of a higher trend for logistic company to involve in regional businesses. So I guess there's still challenge ahead that we have to actually look into it in this near months. Thanks, Gary.
Thank you, Ken. So your perspective is that because of this situation right now, we have to basically come together and collaborate and maybe even share some data also if possible. And I suppose we are suggesting, or you are suggesting here, that perhaps a kind of a community platform may serve the industry by and large. I can think of one that is already just been launched recently, and that is from the initiative of our own Changi Airport, actually. So for the benefit of those who are still not aware of this, this is actually called the Changi Airport Cargo Community System. So if you have an opportunity, please try and Google this, because it is still very hot from the press. I hope I'm not jumping the gun here on behalf of CAG, but I thought this is a good opportunity to share this with everyone out there. No doubt it is termed as Changi Airport Community, but it is not strictly restricted to just air cargo. So with that, and on that note, I want to move on quickly to Sanju. Hi, Sanju. I'd like to hear from you, and perhaps the audience would like to hear from you also. What are your thoughts with regards to supply chain disruption, especially in the context of iHub solution?
Sanju, I believe you are muted. Okay,
Sorry.
there we go.
The disruption is actually very immense, and I can draw on some examples. For example, when the circuit breaker first went into effect, a lot of my customers suddenly couldn't work from the office. And basically those who are serving the B2B segment, like for example, the departmental stores and all that, they are forced to close. So suddenly maybe 90% of the business is gone. And some of them, if they're lucky, they have maybe 10% where they sell B2C online. Now the thing is, there are also companies that did not have the online presence. That means straight away they do not have revenues, and even with the government support, it's actually insufficient to cover costs. So in a way, I look at it, this crisis has taught us that you have to be digital. If you are not, you really have to rush for it. For example, our systems are linked to the major e-commerce marketplaces. So if the goods are in my warehouse and they are able to sell using the phone, through email with the customers, they can still trade and they can still have revenue. But then again, some of them are facing issues because they can only work from the office. So even if I process the orders for them, they have a whole host of work. They have to wait until they go back to office and they update their back-end systems. So there's so many issues that it throws up. And the fact is, you need to be on an online platform. For example, order processing and things like that. And you must be available online 24/7. No? And even taking of orders, you just can't, you cannot go back to your office or visit the stores. That is the only choice. Yeah, so I would say it's a very huge disruption. And with the government support, and of course, given the time that some companies have, I think this is probably one of the best times to start looking at the entire process and the value proposition to the customers. Thank you, Jerry. Yeah.
Thank you, Sanju. Thank you for sharing with us your digitalization journey. And you can see that actually you are already quite advanced in the stage of your digitalization journey. Perhaps maybe the other two panelists will also, can you share with us also to what extent of your digitalization journey are you currently at right now? And from the automating process to reduction, on reliance on manpower, how has digital, enable you to perhaps enhance your logistic and supply chain? Eugene, please, if you could share with us.
Okay, thanks, Terry. Okay. For Machindo himself, we had implemented this logistic digitalized for the last 5 years. Okay, during this circuit breaker, to show us that actually digitalized technologies in need for our industry, especially when the circuit breaker, like what can say, our government MTI need all the people working from home. I believe, especially logistic like transport like us, is not many of the company invest on that, but Machindo is one of them, already done it for the last 5 years. So during this circuit breaker, 90% or 95% of my staff, they ever work from home. Even before that, actually my operation team, before the circuit breaker, my operation team already work from home. Like my operation manager, I think 1 month I only see him once. For the whole month, they can stay at home and work. I think this is the technology to help us. In the why we are doing this, I think with the technology, we can help us to get a young generation people to join us. Especially in logistics, we know we always have a difficulty to get the right people doing a right job. You see, always they have a feedback, a complaint from the below, say, logistics always a long hours, unflexible. But during this 5 years period after we implement this, actually, Machindo can get more young people to join us. Average in my office now, I think average age below 40. I think this is the thing that to attract young people to join us. Firstly, and now working at Machindo today, they're able to work 9 to 5 or anytime they can let office, even though they still can work just with a handphone or with a one laptop, wherever they are. The flexible time, I think that's what moving forward, the young generation need it. And they're able to spend more time with the family, that rather than stay at the office for long hours. I think the technologies that help us in the other way, that is more productivity. During this circuit breaker, I noticed that most of my staff, actually they're more productivity than what they're working from office. They're more independent and more productivity and initiative, whatever they do. Even in Sunday, Saturday, they still communicate with customer. They respond to what customer want. I think that's it. In our logistic industry, moving forward, believe that the technology, digital technology, should implement to all the company. I think then we can change the image of our industry to attract more young people to our industry. That actually, logistics is not longer is dirty and longer hours in the office. There are more flexible jobs for them to work.
Eugene, can
Thanks,
I jump
Gary.
in? Can I jump in here?
Yes.
You're saying that the people more productive at home, right? So now with the phases coming through and people can start going back to work, do you think you will carry on the way things are now? I'm like let them carry on working from home.
Yes, Jen. Like I say,
Really?
before this circuit breaker, two of my staff already working from home for the few months. Only we need some meeting or some other urgent thing, they will come back. Like my operation manager for the past 6 months, they enjoy working at home.
Okay.
Even today, one of my staff told me that, boss, I don't come back. Can I attend working from home? I say, yes, next month then you come back, then you see how.
Okay.
That's the way we have the technology to help us for all this. Is it?
Okay. I have an interesting follow-up question. It's actually in our Q&A. Someone's asking now, if that's the case, right, everyone can carry on working from home, right? The other problem facing a lot of company leaders now is how to stop people from overworking. I don't know whether the other panelists want to jump in here.
No, like I say, is in especially in Singapore, I believe that in our logistic industry, we have a very difficult to get the right people. I think this change will help us and to make the new image to the whole industry, and to attract the more young people. Say actually, logistic can be worked different way. You also can be like a bank working 9 to 5. You can enjoy your Saturday and Sunday with your family, but when you need it, you still work. I think that's the point to let the industry know that we have to make a change to help our industry become grow. I think that's what the whole industry wants in the moving future.
Gary looks like he wants to say something.
Yeah. So this question that is being flashed, I think it is very much with regards to HR issues, of course. But I think the challenge here really is how do leaders like the three of you manage your staff in terms of working from home? Because there is really no more boundaries anymore, right? You don't have to commute to the office. You don't have to commute to the site, because at any time you are always switched on anytime. So as bosses in your own rights, how do you, for example, take care of their welfare for one, in terms of maybe even mental health also. I mean, these are all very important issues, right? Because look, everybody is not used to working from home before the pandemic. So there's always been, a work-life harmony, so to speak, right? But to be at not 24/7, but to be almost every other day that you are connected. So how do you manage as bosses? How do you manage your staff? I think really that's the question,
Gary,
if I'm not wrong.
Okay. Gary, I think that this is on trust. I think you have to trust your staff that actually even they're at home, they're working.
Right,
To me,
right.
is it? I told them that as long as customer did not call me or complain, mean that you are done your job. It's simple as that.
Yeah.
Is it? Without them do a job, customer will have a complaint or have call me. I think as long as customer did not call me, mean that you already complete your job. It's simple as that to us.
What about you, Ken? Have you got anything to add on to that? How do you manage? I know you got quite a big pool of staff as well, so in your organization.
Yeah, actually, I think the first pool of staff who says that actually they can work from home is the sales force actually. But actually, if you look at it this positively, it is something which we like I say that the business model that we can actually rethink for many to rethink is first of all, yeah, I guess the sales force can work at home, but I think on the other hand, as an employer, I guess you could actually scale down your office space, I mean, we know in Singapore, office space is actually one of the high costs. Why not? It's a good thing. It's a win-win situation. But actually, I also want to actually, this circuit breaker situation, one thing is that, for any digital transformations, we are actually just into it. That's why I couldn't share much. But I think the biggest challenge we are talking about is actually employee pushback and adoption. Many actually are having this refusal kind of attitude in the past to even learn about all these things and to be, how to say is that, systemize all their work processes. But actually during this circuit breaker, I think a lot of them learn and understand the importance of having this adoptions for digital, which I think it positively. I felt that it's a good thing that this happened. And it just shows that the importance of, the company or as an industry that we have to move forward for all these adoptions. Yeah. Thanks, Gary.
Okay, Sanju, I'm just going to jump to you very quickly now. We all know that it's well and good to talk about digitalization, but companies have consideration and constraints also to think about, right? So what do you prioritize? How do you prioritize? If you are about to begin a digitalization journey, the reason why I'm asking you is because you are already quite ahead of of a lot of people. Perhaps what are your thoughts in terms of resilience and business sustainability for your logistics activities? What are the considerations?
Okay, that's a very big question. Now,
you got 1 minute to answer
that. Okay, I think before we talk about digitization, what's important is first you must really understand your business process. What is your current process, and are there even before you start putting in your IoTs, your hardware, your software, are there anything in there that actually unnecessary that you can cut? What is the correct process that will serve the needs of the customer and to deliver productivity? So that's the first thing. Secondly, then you look up and say, okay, what digital tools are there that you can deploy? Like for example, you have sensors for temperature. If you're in transportation, you have door sensor, you have GPS, and all sorts of devices. How does these digital tools actually help you in your whole entire supply chain and to increase the productivity? There are many things to do, and the danger is that if you just jump in and just buy a hardware, you will get very disappointed, and then your staff will say, look, I tell you, digitalization doesn't work, So what's important is define the process very well, understand where the bottlenecks are, understand how digital tools can help you. And I would say very importantly is to go for low-hanging fruits first. For example, today, many logistics companies are still doing manual data entry. okay? And when the customers email their order, they have to go and enter the order into the system. Maybe there should be a platform where customer upload the documents and the data. Then you don't have the key. So find ways and means to destroy work. So-called, do it in such a way that you don't have to do any work. Okay, and then when in our industry we sort a lot of documents. Okay, maybe instead of printing and sorting, you print to demand. So there are many ways to do it, and there are 1,001 things to do. In the years that I've been doing this, you just have to go for the 80-20 rule, Find those 2 or 3 things they are quick to do, and they can bring maximum results. And then you will see the culture start to change. The staff start to adopt those things. When I had my handheld smart tablets in the warehouse, I have a big group of people who are in their 50s and 60s, so scared of it. And we get involved from day one, and we have to make the fonts very big for them, So, and then we purposely just do 1 or 2 things first. And then when they started and they begin to realize that actually it's very easy, then you can go into bigger things. So I'm not sure whether that answers your question.
Very much. Thank you, Ken. Sorry, Sam, you. Thank you so much. Okay, my next question is going to appear a little condescending, but I know all of you will be, up to the task for it. So, if there's one thing that you think is most memorable in your operational hiccup, or as really a great challenge to you in your experience of your digitalization journey, what would that be? Perhaps Eugene first. What is the greatest challenge? In terms of embarrassing failure.
I think that you see, what Ken say is the need to change the staff mind. I think that we having when we implement the first, many of especially our order worker told me, okay, I see whiteboard. 1 hour you ask me to see computer. How are you going to do? I think
so staff mindset is basically the biggest challenge for you.
Yeah.
Everything else is.
Firstly, I think the staff mindset. Secondly, you have to tell them why this changing will help them to moving forward, and let them know that after this changing, they were much easy to doing their job. Like for example, that working from home, all this. When they adopt it, they see that working, they will do it continuously. I say, for the first started, we really having a problem on the staff turnover is very, very high.
Okay, so it's basically still boils down to staff mindset. Okay, what about you, Ken? What would be the one? I only allow one only because the rest will be taken up by the Q&A, the other sections.
Thanks, Gary.
Sorry.
I'm actually only initial into it. So probably actually, I would like to share.
We are talking about hiccups. We're talking about hiccups.
I think the hiccups I think all the way is from your first step for every company. To move into the first step. And I think for many logistics supply service providers like ourselves, many decision makers may have the lack of expertise on all this digitization, even on the resources as what Sanju has mentioned. But I guess the most important is that they must realize that from this circuit breaker and from all this pandemic that is happening around, things have to move into this digital so-called data resources sharing. I guess that is the main thing that have to actually put forward. And I think the understanding of the IT is one thing, but I guess, you just have to engage project managers, IT project managers, to actually look into your business processes and job design. In fact, actually, we have went through close to 4 or 5, which you know, oh, which some of it that I even fall asleep because it sounds so alien to me with all these IT informations, you know. But
I hear you.
end of the day, yeah, end of the day, I guess, you know, this is something which, you know, you just have to be taking the little first step forward.
I hear you. I hear you. So when we because we are basically our domain is in supply chain and logistics, right? So when we are sitting with the IT, so-called the experts, we will look like just a kid in the block when we're sitting there. So I can imagine how embarrassing it can be, especially you are a big tauke, and then you know you're supposed to have the know all, but then at the same time you're telling yourself that look, there's so many of these technical jargons that I don't even know where to start. So I hear you. Sanju, what do you think is your one memorable hiccup? May not be the biggest, but the one that you remember the most along your journey.
I would say is the key is the mindset, especially at the top management level and the middle management. It's not the workers. Actually, my experience, the workers are easiest. It's actually the senior management because of their experience, and because let's not forget that the current senior management we have today, we are born in the analog generation. We're not born in the digital generation. So a lot of us came through that, and we are in an era where we are crossing from analog to digital. So a lot of them could not tune to the new way of thinking. And I mean, I hear what Ken say about the IT people. IT people are not the experts. We are supposed to be the domain expert, or what I call the knowledge engineer. You need to bring together the knowledge engineer plus the IT and people and the digital natives. Then you can create a sustainable digital system. In the end, if you let the IT people run it, it's going to run you to the ground. It costs you millions of dollars and you get nothing. So you really have to, it has to come from us. And the first people to invest in is really the people like ourselves, the top management, and then followed by our middle management. And the other thing is, and along with it comes the values. I must stress the word values, because are you doing it just for money? If you're going to do it just for money, then you will miss the whole story. You know, you have to decide what is valuable to you. Is it the customers, your staff, your customers, wanting to run things in an eco manner, and you know, and make their life better. And when you decide you want to do all this, the digital part will come in naturally, and of course the P&L will come in naturally. So, and then the other one bit I want to say is, no such thing as you can get people outside and do your work. No way. The knowledge actually resides in our own companies. We have to grow our own timber. I would say it that way. And the most successful implementation actually comes when it's driven by our own people. We have very refreshed mindset. Yeah, that's what I have to share.
Wow, thank you, Sanju. Those are really a whole string of words of wisdom that I think not only the audience perhaps could take, I think I can also take away some of it personally myself. So whenever you're ready for a coffee, maybe we can pick up this conversation further. So I have one last final question to round this session off. How are we doing with time, Jane?
To take one last question?
Yeah, take one last question, yes. Okay, this is this question says simply like, while we do recognize and acknowledge like staff mindset has to change. So he thinks that company leadership has to be open-minded and invest resources in quality L&D, etc. as well. Now, it takes two hands to clap. So the question is, for the panelists, how have you as a leader helped in the change management process? So I think we will start with Eugene to round this up, and then followed by Ken, and then Sanju, you can have the last say. Eugene, please.
Yeah, like what Janos Sanju said, I think the mindset had to change from the top management to the below. You see, all the decision maker is from the top decide, then have to guideline the second level or the bottom level to done the job, then follow by all the worker. All this is from the top level mindset, bring down, make the thing success. Like what just now Sunju also said that we can't depend on the consultant to do this for us. You see, because most of the thing that consultant did not know the whole process or the need of the company. Consultant always give us the one, make something one to your company. End of the day, you have a failure on the whole process on the digital life. And the move forward, I think that in our logistics, we need a new platform to join our industry together. Like what you highlight just now, maybe from our Singapore airline. I think that's in the secret. I think we need something in the logistics. We need something like that to move forward, to group the whole industry together. We cannot depend on individual as now. We have to do it as a group to make the thing happening in the future.
So as a community, that's the message. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Eugene. Ken, what's your parting for this? Your parting words? Yes.
Sorry. Okay. Again, I think for many logistics service provider, I think because of the regional businesses that is increasing for a lot of Singapore companies, I think we need visibility in supply chain data ability. This is to provide, I think, digitally across borders, so that in times like this, we will not face with disruptions, and the cargo gets stuck in the custom because of all this data not being able to share or be passed across. I think moving on, as far as I think manufacturing companies or exporters or importers that we are dealing with, our customers, I think their expectation also for performance, for improved performance, has also increases. And then logistics being part of their value chain, if logistic companies are unable to even support their digital culture or without digital solution, I think moving on, it will risk actually obsolete in the long run for logistics service provider like ourselves. So I guess it's that both ways, operational that is required, and also on the expectation from customers. It is something that becomes part of your value service as a logistic player.
Thank you very much, Ken. Unfortunately, I think due to time constraint, we have to stop at this point, at this juncture. Thank you very much, panelists, for a very fruitful and very informative session.
Thank you, gentlemen, for warming us up and getting us ready for the breakout session.
Welcome back, everyone, to this breakout room number 1. Our topic for today is actually managing complexity and a move towards greater supply chain resilience from a MNC's perspective. Good afternoon, Roxanne. How are you?
Good afternoon, Jerry. I'm good.
So our speaker today is Roxanne Deschmich. She's the Vice President for Global Supply Chain at AMS AG, an organization with a global presence across Europe and Asia that covers the whole scope of supply chain functions. Roxanne has long-standing experience in the tech industry and brings her extensive experience to apply in supply chain transformation for value creation. She also sits on advisory committees for the Industrial System Engineering faculty at the National University of Singapore. Prior to AMS, she was product engineer, program manager within the Thales Group, a front-end yield manager at Altis Semiconductor, and supply chain director for several years at Infineon China. Now let us dive straight into the matter at hand. Roxanne, I would like to ask you, how does an MNC views resilience, example, your inventory buffers, your lead times, your financial consideration, and how has this actually crisis impacted the semiconductor industry in terms of demand disruption, supply disruptions, and workforce impact?
So I think first, when we talk about resilience, the importance is always to be prepared for different scenario and to react, because this helps you to react fast, which is obviously very important, particularly when you are facing a crisis. So in our case, we have on hand a strong business continuity plan, which gives us guidance as of what to do when facing a crisis, what to structure, what kind of team to put together, as well as what to do in a normal way to be prepared for a crisis. So if I start with the second element, which is ongoing plan of being prepared, it's all about stocking points. So making sure that you have LC WIP in your pipeline throughout the chain. Healthy in the sense that it should neither be too high nor too low. So having clear targets and clear monitoring of those inventories so that you take the proper action should it fall below the target or go above the target. As well as finding ways, if we look at more the transportation network, of ensuring that you have a vibrant partnership with different players who have skills to offer in different lanes. Be it a blend between integrator and global forwarder. So maybe as a disclaimer, I should say the semicon industry tends to fly a lot. So I will not talk about ocean freight or too much of trucking, but it's really looking at your air freight partner and being able to leverage on different capability. So that when a disruption comes, you have different means to face this disruption. And this really helped us in facing this recent COVID-19 situation in the way of being able to leverage priorities, go into a higher freight mode so that we could speed up the carryover from supplier to our manufacturing side to avoid any disruption. And if I go to facing a disruption, I think the importance for us was from the very early stage to form a global task force to look at different aspects. So to look obviously on protecting our people and our employees, and thus sharing best practice throughout our different sites, being able to react to government direction. So this was one aspect of the task force. And of course, the second aspect of the task force is to make sure that we look at our supply and make sure that we have proper visibility, proper information throughout with the different partners, because there is an important term in supply chain is chain. So it's not that we are behaving or reacting or operating in isolation. We have an upstream chain which comes from our supplier, maybe from our supplier, and we have a downstream chain which goes into our different manufacturing sites towards our customer and maybe our customer. And this is where creating transparency, visibility, adapting the different nodes to upstream reaction help us to make best plan and to know from an organization perspective how we were performing along that plan, to capture any new information, and thus to come up with updated plan, so that we could communicate downstream what is going to happen. What was also very important is, I think in the previous plenary, you were discussing about technology. Yes, technology is important, but I think in such a disruption, it's also your connection with your supplier, your partnership, which helps to pull you through. Because that's through partnerships that you have a common goal and common desire to fulfill, and this maybe a digital platform might not help. Obviously, the digital platform is there to create this visibility I was talking about, to make sure information flow is transparent, so that you as a human, together with your partners, be it internal partners or external partner, can make the best decision. So I think from a MNC perspective, that would be really the two angles. So which is having a plan, so which is what's the purpose of a business continuity plan, which we review regularly, so that we can also enhance this plan. I think that will be also the opportunity after, once we have stabilized completely the COVID-19 crisis, we can also revisit that plan to make it even stronger for better preparation for the next time. So making sure that this plan is up to date, so that you know who are the people to be called for in this global task force I was talking about. And then making sure you focus on execution, you focus on the sharing information and making things transparent, and bringing a lot of collaboration.
Roxanne, as a veteran in the industry, and having survived so many previous crises, how is this one any different?
I think this one is broader. So it's and that's where we in our case we saw two stages of the crisis. The first was after Chinese New Year, where most of the disruption was coming from China. And once China was maybe on the recovery path, that's where the second round of disruption started to come, with lockdown measures in Europe, and then maybe actually a third ripple with the lockdown in Asia, so first in Malaysia, in the Philippines, and then later on in Singapore. So I think compared to previous crises, so if we would remember, there was the latest most dramatic might have been either the Fukushima tsunami or the ash cloud in Iceland. I think that's on top of my mind. There was flooding in Thailand as well in between, but I think the Fukushima and the ash cloud was the biggest one. But the perimeter of the disruption was reasonably limited under bracket. So thus the implication, it affected a part of the business, but not as broadly as what we've seen with COVID-19. So I think that's really where we had to be even more skilled than in the previous case. But of course, we could leverage in some of the practice in the previous natural disaster to react to this current crisis.
So I'm just going to narrow down our conversation into the air freight sector, because of the nature that the industry, the semiconductor industry, is designed. Now, we know that we've been experiencing bottlenecks and disruption in the supply chain from increased border controls, insufficient air freight capacity, and to a certain extent labor shortage also as well, due to the safe distancing measures. So how have you, within a short period of time and managed to navigate these challenges while hoping to maintain some reasonable service level to your customers?
This is what I was referring to before. So it has always been our desire to have multiple partners for, multiple, the term is a bit too strong, a couple of very good partners for our transportation. And all of them had some different strengths in different areas throughout the crisis. And thus we worked very closely with them to find alternative to newly coming bottleneck. And thus playing around with their different skills, this is what helped us to minimize any sort of disruption. Of course, monitoring circumstances with local authority also was helpful so that we could react fast on any change. So if I remember in the Philippines, there was a point in time where the custom were reducing work, and there was starting to have some lockdown in between different provinces. But then we also learned that you could gain cross-province permit, and thus we were very prompt in calling for those permits. So that again, when you hear about what is going to change first time and in the prime, you have a first mover advantage. So I think this is also the value we have demonstrated throughout this crisis, is our ability to act in a very agile way, which is maybe the one of the core value of AMS, and maybe this is what we are still able to do as MNC. We are still able to operate with almost the agility of a startup, and this is extremely important when you face a disruption. Is this capability to capture what is going to happen, to have the right. This is built through times, because it means you need to also have the right connection. The right relationship with the important player in your food chain, if I say it like this. Thus, you get the information first. Thus, you have a first mover advantage, and thus you can fare better than maybe a competitor or another company. And I think this was really very essential. To keep this connection with our different players, to be able to capture trends and find together the best way forward.
So you are not just big and raw, strong, but you are also agile as well. That's great to hear. At this point of time, Roxanne, I'm going to take on a question from a Miss Pauline Wee. So she's curious to know whether the pandemic gave you this opportunity to work with partners you never would have considered before. And has this pandemic reshaped the way you think about value creation and business development opportunities?
I would say at large, not really, because we have also to manage properly our resources and effort, and their focus was to make sure we could continue to operate and to make sure we could move things around. Creating a new relationship takes some time, and thus might not be the right thing to do in such a time frame. Of course, it could have been throughout that there has been one or the other exception. So typically, particularly at the beginning in China, where we might have gone through intermediate partner, which were not our usual players. But this usually was handled by our logistics service provider, not by us directly. So they were pulling from their own network. So they were maybe not the trucking company we were using traditionally, but this was a known trucking company for our logistics service provider. So I think it's the time is maybe after the crisis, once we reflect to see whether there are some opportunity for further diversification in one area or the other, if we have identified some points where we could have done better, and that's going to be the lessons learned activity we will do in once we have resumed a fully stable environment. But during a crisis, I would really not do that.
Perfectly understand. Now I'm going to move on to some HR issues and questions. How have MNCs actually coped with a limited human resource due to this safe distancing that we are talking about, especially on the floor? And also, what about staff that are working remotely? Can you give some examples, to address workers' for example, mental health, emotional well-being, and physical safety through workforce protection measures in these trying times?
So in this way, we were very much in sync. So if I focus particularly on Singapore, so we have been all along very much in sync with government guideline. And in some way anticipating some of those guidelines as well. So if I take the example of my team, I think we decided to go on a staggered workforce already back mid of March. So which was much earlier than the circuit breaker, which came beginning of April. From two perspectives. So one was, again, looking at business continuity to make sure that there will be always resources available to work. And thus, because we were on a staggered workforce, this also helped us when the measures in social safe distancing got introduced. This really helped us to comply to these safe distancing measures. I think we got a lot of support from our facility, so our facility department. We did a lot of nice marking in our offices so that we would know where to sit, where not to sit. And they really look at beefing up the filter in the office, making sure there would be all the ample supply of hand sanitizer displayed and in various areas. We took a lot of action to close down the pantry, so that might not have been a very popular act, but that was obviously a needed step. And then if you talk about mental health, so if I would talk about my own department, so we had recently our, we call it town hall meeting. And then what we decided for this town hall meeting is maybe not only to talk about project and business trend, we also took maybe half of the time to talk about how people were coping during this work from home and disruptive time. So we did a mini survey so if I hope people in the audience are familiar with the change curve. So we did a mini survey to see how people were along the change curve. The result came surprisingly good. That most people were already in either adopting the new way or in the ramp up phase. So it was more positive than I actually would think. And then we did a sharing session. So a couple of my staff volunteered to share their experience throughout the journey. So how they adapted, how from being very disrupted, they suddenly set up their office in their home. They managed to cope with a lot of kids around to find their own space so that they could still continue to work. And I think that's to address it in such an open way. So I received a lot of very positive feedback. But before that, because this was done maybe a couple of weeks ago, before that we made sure that we had still a lot of contact with our people. So I have Joe Fix with all my staff every week, and whether you do it from phone or whether you do it with a visual, with a face-to-face, doesn't really matter. So the importance is to spend the time. And maybe make also an effort to not only jump into operational topic, but also to bring in the conversation the social elements, so that you would also get a feeling as of how people are feeling about the situation, and be able to empathize with their circumstances and give them the proper encouragement. So I think this is also an opportunity. I mean, I think I should say there should be a lot of Chinese speaking in the audience. So I think we all know the Weiji is a crisis and opportunity. So I think this crisis also gives us opportunity to develop and to further sharpen our leadership skills, our connectivity with our people, so establishing a trust relationship. And as well as maybe showing our value as human in the office versus digital tools.
Can see and appreciate the you still have a little bit of your Chinese influence from the days in Infinite.
Something like this, yes.
So one question that I meant to ask you also is with regards to Industry 4.0, right? How have you leveraged on Industry 4.0, especially during this time, and to what extent has it actually been an advantage for you that you are the first mover in a situation when a crisis like this? How has it helped you?
I think.
And can you give some examples as well, like in what way?
I think the benefit of Industry 4.0, so particularly in supply chain, so for those who are familiar with the framework, so or for those who are actually maybe not familiar with the framework. So Industry 4.0 look at three different elements. So one is the vertical integration, which is exactly integration within the factory. One is the horizontal integration, which is integration across factory and with customer. And the last is digital integration, which is how you track your intelligent products throughout the chain. I think in circumstances like this, obviously it helps in creating, from a supply chain perspective, if you have system which gives you visibility as of what is happening within your overall supply network, you get an advantage. Whether you want to leverage everything on the digital capability, most likely not, because as all of you know, most of the model, be it statistic or be it AI, leverage on learning data. So AI engine is very smart on what it has learned before. When you face a crisis, I think the engine might be a little bit at a loss because there has not been training data as of how do you react in a crisis. So I think where we leverage is on tools which gives us visibility, which gives us the ability to make the best decision. But the decision taken over by the human is even more important when you face such a crisis, because you have to react fast, and thus you might not be willing to wait for another engine run You might want to capture an opportunity. So could be, I don't know, you have the chance to charter a plane with somebody else. You want to capture this opportunity. You don't want to think for another 2 weeks before making a decision. So I think you have to combine. So my biggest learning out of this crisis, honestly, is if you would have asked me maybe 2 years ago, I was all about going digital. I was all about leveraging on statistics, all about questioning myself as of what was the future of work. With this crisis, I think it's where you see exactly how human and machine will partner together in the future for enhanced results. So there is not a competition between the human and the machine. It's really a collaboration where the machine helps you to have access to more information than what we have before, so that you can make more informed decisions. But you still need you are still needed to make those decisions.
Well
and I think
said.
that's the biggest learning I had on this. Obviously, in Industry 4.0 and all the aspect of automation which comes behind helps you to tackle manpower crunch if you are in such a situation. So that definitely helps. But I guess at the end of the day, you still need to balance between how much automation you bring versus how much you still need to take control, particularly for very specific and complicated case as a crisis.
So as much as we leverage on automation, on digitalization, on 4.0, the human element is still essential and still critical when it comes to the decision-making process. We've got an interesting question here. We're going to back up a little bit on the HR journey that you were explaining and sharing earlier on. It's from Mr. Glenn Tan. And he wants to know basically how did you manage the small percentage of the naysayers or the difficult to change employees, especially with minimal face-to-face engagement now? So do you tell them to take a permanent leave and stay home permanently, or what?
No, I think it has been, so in our case, so for my team, it has been a step-by-step journey. So somehow maybe I was a bit forward-looking to say, okay, maybe we should do staggered workforce before the circuit breaker. So we in fact started much earlier. It was collaborative, maybe not so, but it was joint discussion. So it was not a top-down decision. It was discussed with the team. I gave them different options. So we talked about, do they want to go 1 week, 1 week, 2 week, 2 weeks, 2 days, 3 days. Some people stay in office, so we debated it. We started with a simple staggered, so 1 week, 1 week. Then we did some learning after 2 weeks. So does it work? Does it not work? We discussed it. And then we continue. We decided it's finally not so bad. So we decided to continue on. And thus when came the time to say, okay, we have to all work from office, the learning curve was not so steep because most of them had already some form of experience in the previous week. Thus they were already used to handling meetings and communication in a digital way. What you have to keep in mind anyway is we are a global company with a lot of people based in Singapore, but having global role. So they are already used in working with people they don't see every day. So it's part of our working environment. Anyhow, so it's not that it's as disruptive as if you have been only working in office and seeing your colleague all the time and suddenly moving to home. So we had already some form of connected environment. And then, of course, we got some support from our IT department to make the tool of communication more and more convenient. So we started initially with Skype, where you cannot really do a video conf. And then we moved to another software platform, so that where you can already do more videos, so that you can also see the face, so that it's really gives you a almost face-to-face feeling. So I think that's how it worked. Yes, so if I go back to my change curve, there are still people who are in the frustration phase. But this, I think we discuss about it. I think that's and they maybe that was also my purpose to do this sharing session, is to give them some inspiration that others had also faced some challenges, also difficult time. But somehow they had rebounds because they also recognize that there is a urgency to change, and thus they found a way forward. And honestly, I mean, 70% of my overall population, so including outside of Singapore, are already embracing the change. So which is quite high figures. So I would see this as a positive sign that humans are also adaptable.
You know, while most companies are downsizing, right, Roxanne, how is it that AMS is still hiring, more staff? Especially when it was reported that recently you actually hired some of the ex-staff from Scoot Airlines, and what this was probably my personal question. What do you see as in the airlines staff that made relevance to a semiconductor company like yours?
Okay, so I think so. First, you have to see they were hired as operators, so to work in our manufacturing line, and it's part of our process.
So sorry, Roxanne. These are not the cabin crews.
Yeah.
Are these cabin? Yeah. The cabin crews.
Yeah. So so they come on board. They get training. So they get trained. They get so before they go into the line, we have 2 weeks. So depend on the line. We have a 2-week certification program, so that people are accompanied and not drop by themselves into an environment they don't know. I think in our lines, so we are in a clean room concept with a lot of standing time. So in this way, I think it's maybe not as glamorous as an airplane, maybe, but it's similar challenges of long-standing hours and working in an environment where you have quite some noise because of all the clean, so you have to recycle the air. So that's the circumstances of a clean room, where you are maybe not seeing the light. So I worked in a wafer fab before, and it's true that you start the morning early and you don't really see the daylight throughout the day. And I think that in this case, the airline industry has similar circumstances. So in this way, maybe not as disruptive as if you pick somebody who is working in a farm in open air and you bring him into a clean room. So I think that's how it's worked quite well, and somehow it's a win-win for all parties. So it works for us and it's also worked for them. But we really, anyway, whether you come from an airline or whether you come from another sector, the most important for us is to make sure that people are properly trained and certified before they get to work. And I think that's also the most important thing to do when you get people who might not be so familiar originally with the industry.
Thank you very much, Roxanne. Final question. Your parting words, recommendation, and perhaps to not just to the industry at large, but maybe to some of the SME audience that is with us here today, with regards to how to build greater responsiveness and resilience into their supply chain.
Mm-hmm.
What would you advise here?
So maybe I would say on two angles. So the first angle is I can appreciate that most of the SMEs might not have a BCP simply because the business went ramping, and the most important was to continue to grow. And since the environment was very promising, it never came as an important point to have a BCP. And a BCP can start small, so it doesn't need to be 30 pages with a lot of elements. I think it can start small and get enhanced through time. That's also what we do. As I mentioned before, we will relook at the one we have and incorporate some of the learning we've done in the during this crisis. So what I would really suggest is to take this chance to put some thought together based on how the company, so the company fares through this crisis, what worked, what didn't work, and what could be done better, and to really articulate that in a preliminary document so that there is the first embryon of future BCP. So again, any experience is an opportunity to learn for all of us, be it MNC or be it an SME. And I think most of us have a lot of reflections throughout this whole journey. And I think it's worth to spend the time to document those reflections and to put them into a plan so that should there be another disruption coming later, at least there is always this document to refer back to say, oh yes, we had this war room concept where we were meeting every day at 8 a.m. to check what was, to do a closed check of what was happening the day before. And so next time come a crisis, you know, oh, okay, then I do my war room from day one. And thus you get really the agility and the speed. So this is I think point number one. Point number two is, as I said before, I think partnership is important during crisis. And sometimes, of course, maybe as SME, you might see your neighbor as your competitor. So let's take the case maybe of the road freight in Singapore. So you feel you have your own truck, you have your own workforce, and the neighbor has his own truck and his own workforce. And then you might not want to think about sharing. But then when you have resource constraints, what to do? At the end of the day, I think what is important in crisis is to manage your customer. And if managing your customer means that you might want to partner with another for a certain period of time to be able to still deliver, I think that might be something advisable to think about, because a satisfied customer or a customer who feels that so any customer can understand that things are difficult during crisis. I think the importance is to make sure to manage expectation and to deliver to promise. And if this means in some ways to partner with somebody else, so be it, because at the end of the day, then a happy customer or well-managed customer during crisis is a returning customer.
Thank you so much, Roxanne, for sharing with us your insights and also for taking the questions as well. We have, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the breakout session. And for the audience, if you still have questions that you may be too shy to ask, please don't worry. You can still join us Interchange community platform, where you can post your comments, interact with other participants, and join in discussions as well. Once again, thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in Interchange after this session and having you join us in future episodes. Thank you very much.
Our topic here is fulfilling the consumer market in extraordinary times. And our speaker here with us today is Mr. Abhik Gupta, Managing Partner of FT Consulting for Eastern Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And he is also former GM at Godrej Group. I'll tell you a little bit more about Godrej Group later, okay? So a little bit about him. He's based in Dubai, and he's an industry veteran with almost 30 years of marketing services, retail, analytics, and general management experience. He has held leadership roles across Asia, Middle East, and Africa, including serving as Managing Director for East, West Africa, and Maghreb region for Nielsen, the marketing research consultancy. And as I mentioned earlier, he was formerly GM at Godrej Group, the Indian conglomerate and major FMCG manufacturer. And he has also experience working with Colgate-Palmolive in marketing. So over the last 18 years, he has led multiple teams in business establishment, turnaround, and growth, and advised clients at board levels on market trends, go-to-market strategies, business transformation, retailing and transformation, growth, and white space identification and innovation. Okay, so that's Abhik. Hi, Abhik.
Hey, Jane,
Thank you so
can you
much.
hear me? Can you
Sorry,
hear me?
say that again?
Can you hear me properly?
Yes, I can. Thank
All
you
right,
so much.
excellent,
Okay.
excellent.
So maybe to get us warmed up and give us a better feel of who you are and so forth. And I want to give you lob you a softball question, okay, just to get you going. Okay. So given your background and extensive range of experience, I feel like you're in the prime position to share very interesting insights on the operational and business implications of supply chain challenges in the FMCG sector. So before we get into it, can you share a bit about your ambit of responsibilities when you were still in the FMCG sector directly?
Well, I started my life more focused on the consumer. So I dealt more with data, with new product development, before I went to take on commercial responsibilities in marketing. So I used to run the P&L for detergents, in addition to buying media and looking after new product development for the group. So as part of the commercial responsibilities and the responsibility for the P&L, we were responsible for the brand, as it happened in the case contract manufacturing, and therefore a certain supply chain logistics, and we were part of the sales and operating team, as we are called. So essentially, I have looked at the full circle. So started with the consumer, looked at the manufacturing bit, and then obviously your final end goal is the consumer. So it's one full circle. So pretty much covered most of the ambit in my time. And then obviously, as I went on to consulting, it has been a lot about how does one reach the consumer. So a lot of the marketing, advertising, distribution, the end, the last mile, as we call it, right? And again, there is a massive amount of logistics and chain involved. I mean, half the times we've been speaking to supply chain saying your product's not there, or it's not reaching the right place, and how do you get there? All that kind of stuff. Or where do you need?
Even more so now, right?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
I'm sure you have a lot of stories to tell about that.
Yeah. Yes, indeed. Yes.
Okay. So with that, let's talk about. Okay, you mentioned that your ambit of responsibility spans like from the front end, from consumers, and back down through the chain, to the manufacturer and the in betweens, the delivery and so forth. I want to maybe shift the conversation a little bit more to thinking about the consumer now, the differences. What are you observing over the last maybe few years in terms of demographics, the changing demand landscape, and what has been disrupted? That's what I'm building up to, because there was a point in time in the last few months when business as usual was disrupted, right? So what was disrupted? What has changed fundamentally?
With your permission, I'll want to use a couple of slides,
okay,
to make my point. It just helps to structure the thoughts a little better. That's right.
Okay.
Thank you. So, uh, look, I think the first thing that we have to understand is that the consumer is always changing, right? And I think the uniqueness of this current environment, and I am specifically referring to the COVID crisis, has actually accelerated certain changes or precipitated certain changes which we need to take cognizance of. In fact, one of my biggest advice to most of my clients, and indeed I have been advising a few FMCG clients of late, is to to recognize the fact that the world is not going to be the same anymore, and there's certain things which are changing forever, and therefore it is important for us to recognize those changes and prepare for the tomorrow while we are handling the current situation at hand, which I can tell you is not easy. So let me just highlight some of the changes that I see very important in the FMCG context. The first is, consumer behaviors are changing forever. For example, I was privy to the plenary session. I heard quite a few minutes of and people talking about how working from home, and I saw a few questions saying, is it good? Is it bad? How do you how do you ensure teamwork in these kind of circumstances? The fact of life is that you're working from home. Just think about it, and I'm trying to be as simplistic as possible. Imagine if you were in the office, you would walk down with your colleague, you will pick up a snack or a juice. Today you're working from home. It's not that snacking stops, but the context and the environment in which you're snacking, changes. If you look at one of the biggest benefactors of this crisis, it's probably digital media. If you look at Netflix, if you look at all these streaming channels, they've galloped in terms of their uptake. You, as consumers, you are rethinking your priorities, and you're asking yourself the question: do I really need something? Do I not need something? Is it something that I can do about, or should I consume in different circumstances? So as there are behavioral changes, your demand pattern changes, and I think as consumer manufacturers, and the operating word is we are fast-moving consumer goods, we are focused on the consumer. We need to recognize how the circumstances are changing, and therefore what we need to how we need to cater to the consumer. Obviously, it varies by category. We are talking about a very, very large set of categories, so I'm being a little generalistic, and I hope that's pardonable. Then obviously, everyone's going through hard times, salary cuts, job losses, uncertainties. So, I was just reading a paper that in the US, the savings rate has gone up from 8% to about 13% or whatever. So people think they need to hold on to their cash much more. So obviously your economic circumstances, the way you look at goods, the way you consume is changing, and obviously that has an impact on your your spending pattern. The third is that while there is this sort of gloom and doom about shops closing, retail outlets not being able to operate, lockdowns, etc., etc. There are also opportunities that are opening up, whether it is through e-commerce, through digital media, whether it is distribution, whether it is advertising, and as a business, therefore, and there are certain changes which are happening forever. Now, if we don't, as a business, recognize these changes, for example, the adoption of e-commerce in FMCGs has accelerated with this crisis. And in fact, I was just reading, an article day before, where in the UK they're talking about, the 60+ consumers who were earlier not so comfortable with e-commerce and the digital media. Today they are actually adopting it much more because they did not have a choice, and once you try it, you realize it's not so bad. So you learn it, and that change is pushing them towards, and they suddenly realize that this
So it's
is
like a silver lining of this pandemic, right? You force
correct.
people to adopt things that they previously weren't receptive to.
Right, but think about it from the manufacturer or the supplier's point of view. If I don't recognize that this is a change forever, and if I don't start catering to the channel, I'm going to miss the boat, right? So, so that's very critical. Then, obviously, identifying white spaces. Again, there are certain types of categories. There's certain types of consumptions which are actually increasing. So you got to look at the opportunities. For example, if you are a soft drinks manufacturer and you see that there is snacking which is increasing, so people are consuming much more snacks, staying at home, and that seems to be the sort of conventional report wisdom as reports are coming in terms of category movements. So I need to identify white spaces and decide what new products I could launch. And then one of the biggest things I think that is happening is with this lockdown, it is pushing a lot of entrepreneurship, it's pushing a lot of decision making, and it's pushing a lot of innovation, which I must say the FMCG industry in some ways was slowing down or was slower prior to the crisis. So that's so much from the consumer side. In terms of supply chain, obviously, I mean, in fact, again, this is direct relevance to the earlier session where we're talking about the disruption of the supply chain. But then, as a manufacturer, you were supplying, you were sourcing your raw materials, your packaging material, etc., from certain locations where you had a certain set of criteria. All of a sudden, you realize with this crisis and with this pandemic, you're probably not so well prepared to deal with such an extreme situation. And then a lot of questions being asked about localization in terms of what is business continuity? How does one ensure business continuity should a crisis like this happen? Again, if I hear and heed the likes of the gurus like Bill Gates and a lot of business leaders who are saying, or rather thought leaders who are saying that this pandemic is not going to be the last. I mean, things like this could happen more so in the future. The question is my business ready for a business continuity plan? Do I have proximity? Do I have flexibility? Because you are adapting to changing environments, and therefore, while cost is an important criteria, or could have been the sole criteria before, here a lot of other criteria are slowly creeping in terms of your evaluation and preparing your partner. In fact, I'm going to probably talk about it later in the session as to what are the sort of guidelines for supply chain. Then there is a massive, obviously, impact on finance, right? I mean, certain disruptions, maybe certain dips in income, then you're regaining lost ground. There are governments who are trying to support businesses. So interest rates are changing, financing, refinancing, cash availability. So and then you have to obviously try and make use of the best resources you have in order to fulfill your business plans and probably your revised plans. So that's very, very critical. And then external, I mean, if you look at what's happening in the larger world today, and there's a fair bit of politics involved, is that there are alliances being forged and reforged, right? There is in some ways some kind of a protectionist attitude, if I might use the word, where you're saying, how do I protect my domestic economies, my domestic companies? If they are suffering, how do governments sort of help them to sustain themselves? So there are you had these economic regions, you had these tax concessions, you had these trade alliances. They are changing, right? And you also need to therefore, and I'm talking about large FMCG companies, global FMCG companies who've got multiple manufacturing units based in different parts of the world from where they're sourcing. So obviously your sourcing patterns and your supply chain patterns need to sort of adapt to the new trade balances, right? And all of these are extremely critical for businesses. And to my mind, therefore, it is while business leaders are looking at the current environment and they have to go through this time, you need to also start looking at the future and see how do you sort of develop in this changed world. Does this sort of
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it sounds almost like while they're making this transition, right, from the old business as usual world, where things are a little more predictable, to a future that's a little more disruptive. Like they have to not just master this ability to pivot and change, but also be ready to keep on changing. You know,
Right.
like right? It's a repeated process because they have to bear in mind that there may be future pandemics and disruptions and all that. They have to keep disrupting themselves. So they need to have a business model in place that's robust enough to handle all these ongoing changes. And I guess that means that people also needs to be ready in some kind of human capability development perspective. I don't know what that might mean. You know, some kind of mentality, you know, that can they are robust enough to deal with all these oncoming changes, and they have to literally be able and willing to go with the flow rather than, you know, like they were saying earlier in the plenary, one of the speakers was saying that one of the main challenges he faced is the mindset of the people. Right? So the mindset looks like it's set for disruption as well. It's not just like digital transformation or that. It's all in our heads as well.
I mean, look, we as human beings, we don't like change, right? And that there is a natural resistance to change. But I think what this world is telling us with the pace of change is that the operating word is flexibility, you know, and that's what, and adaptability. So that's what is going to ensure that's going to distinguish the successful organizations from the not so successful ones.
There's actually an interesting question in the Q&A. Someone's asking, what model can we start with, especially when cost efficiency and budgets are still in place? You know, given the need to worry about adapting and pivoting fast, and yet there are certain models in place that runs business as usual. What can we look towards in terms of like a new model for working in the new world?
Look, I don't think there is a one-size-fit-all model or a solution for anyone. But what I would definitely urge is that, you know, when you had a costing model today here, I mean, in fact, let me take an example and explain. One of the fallouts of this crisis, for example, is that there are a lot of small players or players who are going out of business, right? Or there is, you know, reduced demand, or there are some companies who are suffering more than the others. Now there is incremental capacity which is available. Now, when I imagine if I were to be a manufacturer and I was taking the responsibility of manufacturing all the products on my own, essentially I was sourcing all the raw material, the entire risk was mine, right? Now, if I see that there is, in fact, look at the changes happening in two ways. One is there is spare capacity available, so I can probably not take so much of my risk, so I save my working capital and sort of go more into variable cost and actually outsource manufacturing and use this spare capacity available. The second advantage is that if you look at the pace of change that's happening, right? If you look at the pace of innovation, if innovation is expected to accelerate, am I going to keep changing my machinery every single year as changes happen? On the other hand, it may be better for me to sort of outsource and therefore at the right moment invest in machinery which is more futuristic and therefore cushions me for some time to come. So, I mean, my advice would be the business model is not just about pure cost efficiency. In these circumstances, you need to build buffer, you need to look at accessibility and business continuity, and therefore you need to factor for it. You need to factor for how you need to reach the consumer more efficiently. So whether it is drone delivery, whether it is through e-commerce, whether it is through creatively through tie-ups, these are things. This is how one needs to rework on the business model and manage the P&L and the cost essentials, so that obviously you don't want to lose out on profitability, but you need to rework on these essentials so that overall you are in a much more flexible and adaptable position than before.
Okay, so it sounds like the planning horizon has narrowed. Maybe the buffers have gone a little bigger. I have no idea. I'm not an expert in this area, but it sounds like lots of changes behind the scenes to make adjustments in view of this new way of thinking that you're suggesting. Right. So I'm wondering, moving on to a question that I wanted to ask: how does digitalization help? Then, I mean, it's notionally it sounds like it can help lots of businesses plan better and all that, but I think it calls for a kind of familiarity and understanding of what digitalization can do. It's not a panacea. It's not a magic pill, right?
Well, I think one of the speakers in the earlier session mentioned it very well, that at the end of the day, what is important is the business model. I mean, the IT part comes in, right? And I think the same truth holds. I mean, if you just look at the focus of the industry, at the end of the day, we are trying to reach the consumer, right? We are trying to cater to the needs of the consumer. Now, if you look at technology and digitalization, in fact, one of the biggest questions that FMCG manufacturers are asking themselves today is, we've got these so-called well-formed channels of distribution, right? You had the distributor and you had the retailer, and therefore, just like you're having your cup of tea, or so you went and sort of bought your tea from the supermarket, or there's someone else who bought it. The question as a manufacturer, as a brand owner, would be, how do I reach you directly, right? How can I reach you faster? How can I make sure that my channel of distribution is insured against any of these fluctuations, right? So, can I supply you through alternative means? Can you order through e-commerce so that I can deliver to your doorstep? Can I tie up with these delivery apps, for example, a Grab in Singapore or a Talabat? I mean, can I tie up with them and have a delivery system so that I can reach, so that I can bypass the system? So the digitization, so the ordering, fulfillment part of it, there is a massive amount of digitization, and as I said before, there is an acceleration. Now, if you look at the internal operations, the whole supply chain itself, I mean, just think, you are working from home, you've got factories based elsewhere, you've got suppliers, you've got multiple suppliers now, because you want to ensure business continuity. It's not a fixed process, it's a dynamic process. Demand is changing. So unless you integrate these systems and you have everyone online, how do you ensure that the business process or the supply chain does not get disrupted, even in the face of this? So there is a big amount of digitization there. And then there is a third part, which is, how do I understand the consumer? I mean, my feedback mechanism, right? So if you look at people consuming social media, people are voicing, I mean, you as a consumer, your likes, dislikes, you're voicing them on consumer behavior. You're voicing them on social media. You have, if I want to understand who you are and what you do, I can actually look at their habits on social media, what movies they like, what they taste, what are their preferences. So when I have to even assess needs, there is a lot of artificial AI, machine learning, social listening, which comes in, which can serve as inputs to me as a sort of product creator. So actually, if you look at it, digitization has sort of multiple phases, and it impacts this industry which is a fairly evolved industry in multiple ways. One in how we reach the consumer, one in our own internal processing. The third is how do we the feedback mechanism, or how we get.
So it sounds this is an aspect of consumer behavior as well, right? That social media behaviors and how they direct their attention online to what they look for, or where they even look for shopping coupons or offers.
Yeah.
So right, so the eyeballs have also gradually over the years shifted, and given the pandemic now, a lot more have moved online. Right, they start looking more on like the common the shopping platforms like Amazon and Lazada and so forth. So I'm sure there's some shift in that direction as well, and that puts pressure on retailers or FMCG manufacturers to shift more marketing dollars in those directions as well, right?
In fact, in 2 points here. In fact, if you see, if you look at the sunrise sort of jobs, the one of the things that you will see is that almost every company is, even in this pandemic, is looking for user experience experts, okay, and user experience people, because everyone is trying to digitize, everyone is trying to enhance user experience, because that's the only way you can hold on to the consumer. So there, if you look at the shift in employment patterns, that's one big change that's happening, right? And then the other part is obviously, when you look at the sort of manufacturing and the analytics, how do I, without being intrusive, how can I know more about consumer behavior, right? And that is I think very, very critical.
Right.
So you will see a lot of shifts even in the traditional sort of employment patterns, if I might say.
I was thinking also, if, like you said, if everybody's going online, everybody's digitalizing in these ways, right? So it calls for maybe innovation in making yourself noticed. Your competition is that much more now. So you must do something different as well, and maybe that's where opportunity could come in. In terms of how you present yourself, how do you reach out to the consumer and rise above all the noise, right?
Exactly. And this is where my sort of submission to all of FMCG leaders is that you need to rethink strategy. The world is not going to be the same anymore. Right?
Okay, I believe we have a second slide, if I'm not wrong.
That's right. I think one of the things I just wanted to sort of point out, is for the FMCG industry, what should we expect? Or I think I've touched upon quite a few of those points, but I just thought I would run through them. One is, you will have we should expect, obviously, depending on category, for essentials, maybe it's less. For luxuries or for personal care, maybe it's more. But certainly there will be market fluctuations, there will be decline, there will be subsequent growth, there will be supply issues. And therefore we need to be able to, our supply chain needs to be able to, sort of adapt to these circumstances. If you look at very large countries, luckily enough, you are in a very urban environment in Singapore. But if you look at large countries, for example, if you look at India, if you look at Indonesia, a large population which used to be migrant laborers or labor in the cities, or used to work in the cities, they've headed back home to their villages, or they are heading back home to the villages, because they see that's a sort of safer environment. What it basically means, there is a shift in demand patterns. So you need to adjust, and you need to adapt to these changing demand patterns. So there is going to be pressure on FMCGs. As it is, FMCG is a pretty mature industry, so there was pressure before. So it's something that I think we need to be able to accept in our stride. And as I was saying, the pressure will be on innovation, and therefore finding the new sort of delta shifts. The second is the shift from traditional channels. If you see a lot of small groceries, cash flow problems, they had to be closed down for some time. They could not sort of continue anymore, reduce working hours, lack of mobility, lack of working capital. So some have closed down. It's not that it's not going to come back. It's going to come back probably sooner than what we would expect. But the fact of life is that there is change happening. On the other hand, modern trade, e-commerce, modern trade has been doing well because it's more planned purchase, right? You're working from home, you're staying at home, the family is at home, so there's a lot of home consumption, and there is a lot of planned purchase taking place. So there would be probably a shakeout within the traditional trade and the organization in terms of size and location. We spoke about e-commerce before, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much. But again, this home versus indoors, what you would have probably gone out for a cup of tea with your colleague and a cup of coffee with your colleague. Today, you would probably feel safer consuming the same cup of coffee, but maybe chatting with your friend over Zoom or over a video call. So consumption is not changing, but consumption patterns are changing. But it will impact what you sell: home packs, bulk packs, individual packs, single packs, your pattern of consumption, and therefore that is something that manufacturers and product owners would have to understand. And then obviously we spoke about manufacturing and supply chain. I think I dwelt on it a little before in detail, but there will be changing in demand, contract manufacturing, there'll be M&A options. Could you buy out a smaller company to add manufacturing capability? So you would need to plan for sustainability, you would need to plan for flexibility, and you would need to plan for proximity so that you do not miss out on the market opportunity.
Right.
So,
and the you that you mentioned, I guess, is more like a two-pronged partnership perspective, right? It's not just the manufacturer, but also there's supply chain partners, distributors, and so forth. This conversation needs to happen.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of my biggest in fact, I was reading a couple of articles, and again, one of the biggest things that they're saying is that you need to know your supplier much better. Who has the capability to adapt? Who has the capability to change? So actually, it is going to call for all the supply chain managers knowing their suppliers much better, and therefore be able to plan better for the future.
Plan and grow together, hopefully.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'm afraid we're coming up to time. So thanks very much, Abik, for joining us today to share your perspectives. And for our audience, you may still have questions they are too shy to ask, but don't worry. You can still ask by joining ITAP Interchange community platform, where you can post your comments, questions, interact with other participants, and join in discussions. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you at the Interchange after this session and to having you join us in future episodes.